At both the debate this week and at the debates we've had so far this cycle for the Democratic primary, there have been a number of topics that have not been discussed nearly as much as they merit. I pointed out on Twitter, climate change did not merit even a single question at this debate. But one topic that has been barely discussed through all of the debates so far is our democracy, voting rights, reforming it to make sure that people have their democracy not only in name, but also in fact. And so we've been doing this analysis over the course of this primary so far with Adam Eichen. Adam joins us once again. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This feels like deja vu.
It certainly does, and I want to give you credit. You're an author and campaigns manager for Equal Citizens. Really appreciate you joining us. So look, we scheduled this interview before the debate, so we could have been surprised. Were you surprised at the debate earlier this week?
Was I surprised? No. Was I hoping for something better? Yes. I mean, again, this marks the fourth debate just this cycle that there wasn't a single question about democracy reform. There was one question about the Supreme Court and what to do about that. Incredibly important, but nothing about the voter purges currently going on in Ohio, nothing about the gerrymandering that has locked Democrats out of power in that state and in states across the country, nothing about money in politics. I mean, this is insane. I mean, talk about something that has kept the Democrats out of power and been systematically benefiting the Republicans for the last decade. You would think that the people who are trying to become the leaders of this party would want to discuss this issue.
So I want your opinion on two sources of the silence. So why is it that CNN and the New York Times, who put together these questions, that they didn't include it? And why is it that the Democratic candidates aren't choosing to bring it up anyway? I mean, at least for climate change, for instance, there were no questions, but Bernie and I think it was Steyer, they both brought it up. So why the silence from those two different groups?
Well, I think that the debates thus far have just shown that they're not willing to engage in some serious issues. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about healthcare, but as you noticed, there was nothing on climate change, and there was nothing on democracy. So I think there's just something perhaps embedded in this corporate-controlled debate system that we have, that they're just not asking the questions that many Americans want to learn more about and where the candidates stand. In terms of the candidates, I mean, I will say that some candidates like Tom Steyer and Elizabeth Warren tried to bring up these issues of democracy reform. And in Elizabeth Warren's case, she pledged to fix democracy first. She said her first act would be passing the anti-corruption plan. And then she was actually interrupted when she was trying to get into a conversation about money in politics by Kamala Harris. Because Harris apparently thought that it was more important to discuss whether or not Trump should be banned from Twitter. That for me was a very upsetting moment in the debate, perhaps even more than at any other point, because we had finally maybe begun to have a conversation about why it was so critical to fix democracy and how to do it. Earlier that day, Elizabeth Warren had actually released her plan, a very good plan, which includes a 6-to-1 match, a public financing plan. It would have been a great opportunity for the senator to talk about public financing, but that conversation was derailed. And actually, most of the front-running candidates have strong democracy reform plans. Bernie recently released an excellent plan that would give every American democracy vouchers like they have in Seattle right now. It's a public financing system. He didn't specify how much the vouchers would be worth, but essentially every eligible voter would receive money essentially to give to candidates, a really kind of a radical form of public financing that could completely revolutionize and democratize political influence. But that didn't come up at all either. Yeah,
and even though, again, like his plans in that area had, I mean, they're not from 6 months ago. It's not like they have to go way back to find the details. They've been in the news the past week or so. Like it seems like it would have been relatively easy to ask some follow-up. So you mentioned solutions there. So I have a couple different things I'd like to get into that in that area. But one is, when you list all of the different attacks against democracy that we're seeing, is it time for a new sort of Voting Rights Act, perhaps something that stretches across the entirety of the country and that protects against these sorts of constant recurring assaults against our democracy?
Absolutely. I mean, the Supreme Court gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act in 2013. And ever since that moment, you see a proliferation of really awful anti-democratic policies that are suppressing the votes across the country. You see that in voter purges. You see that in the proliferation of voter ID laws. So absolutely, we have to restore the Voting Rights Act to make it so that states with a history of racial discrimination or states with, who have engaged in bad actions have to get federal approval before changing their voting systems. But we need more than that too, because it's not enough to just go back to the Voting Rights Act. We have to have national federal legislation that guarantees same-day registration, automatic voter registration, restoring voting rights to those who have been convicted of felonies, to finally end that stain on our nation rooted in Jim Crow. We need to have regulations of voter purges. We need to do everything we can on the federal level to ensure the right to vote is exactly that, a right.
Yeah.
That we try and maximize political participation instead of trying to restrict it. And that can only really be done. It can be done in states across the country, but it's time to now really think about federal legislation.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.